Hello, everyone. Bobo here with Crisis in the ToyVerse and Comic Crusaders. We have a very awesome guest today who's decided to take some time out of their busy schedule to talk to us about a new documentary film that's definitely awesome and amazing. I've seen it already, and it's been pretty wonderful. So, joining us today on the show is a star of the show, Dags. Dags, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Very, thank you very much for that. It's like the big build up. It's very exciting stuff. What can I say?
I try to do my best to make it at least fun, right?
Yeah.
So I rewatched the show today, little film. Um, Starting at the beginning, I guess, what brought you to the project?
Well, it's kind of funny because even though I'm the central focus of the production, I had nothing to do with its creation. Michael Wayne, who lives about 1,000 kilometers away from me in a different city, which is probably about 700 miles, I think,
Okay.
in American terms, he came across my website because I had a Batman collection for many, many years. And I wrote about it on my website, and I was very, very honest in how I sort of assessed all the items that I had, because as an addicted Batman collector as I did actually buy things that I didn't like. And I was being honest about it. I wasn't sugarcoating anything. And he saw that website just as a general search for something that he was looking online for. He saw that I was down in Melbourne and then contacted me about coming down to not only see the collection, but also to make a documentary about it, because from his perspective, he hadn't seen anybody before who was so honest in their appraisal as to what they owned. Everybody would normally say, "Oh, it's great, it's wonderful, what I have is fantastic." Whereas the opposite, I was critical of a lot of things that I had. So that really intrigued him.
Oh, nice. Yeah, definitely. As you watch the film, you sort of get an idea of like who you are and what you're all about in terms of collecting. Because I'll be honest with you, there are parts where I watch the video and I'm like, oh God, I've been there, or like, like for example, when you were speaking about like going from one collecting subject matter to another, like from the Star Wars stuff to the LP stuff to that was kind of fascinating to me because I've been there before trying to figure out like for me it's always trying to figure out like what do I want to invest the disposable income I have on for a long time that's what it was for me, and then I finally settled in on toys, um, just because it just kind of fell in my lap and I fell in love with them again after being away from them for a number of years.
Mm. Yeah, it was interesting because I was part, and I'm still a part of a large science fiction pop culture community in my city, and in the 80s was very large, very prevalent. So it wasn't like a lot of collectors who were effectively on their own, just doing their thing. I was with a group of people, and all of them had interests in different fields, collecting. Like someone collected a lot of Star Wars posters and magazines. Someone was collecting a lot of Transformers things. Somebody else was really into Jerry Anderson and whatever else. So by default, when I sort of became a part of this group, I sort of felt like, well, I need an identity for myself. And because at that point, Batman hadn't come out yet, I did start off with Star Trek and Star Wars movie posters. And then I got into the soundtrack albums, which when you sit and think about it, I was buying soundtrack LPs to science
Mhm.
fiction movies, not to play them, just to say that I had a collection of them. And of course, that's a completely cockeyed way of going about things, buying things that you're not actually using them for what they were originally intended for. But that's how I found my way into the community. I wasn't peer pressured into it. It was just something that I felt like, well, I've got to be a part of the scene. What's my thing going to be? And that's where it all sort of started from. And then once Batman kicked in a few years later in the group, I became the Batman guy, and everybody started looking out for me. So yeah.
It's funny that you bring up the Batman thing because I remember in the documentary they're speaking about that logo and how that logo was
Mm.
sold. Anything you watch about that film, I was like 4 when that movie came out. But that logo just stands. It's etched in a person's mind.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because by today's standards, people don't get the same reaction that we did back then. Because you're right, when that Batman logo came out, they redesigned it, they recolorized it, and it was such an iconic image. You didn't even need any words. So, like even the video, the VHS video, it just had the logo and nothing else, and that sold everything. I would argue, it has probably even more power than say the Superman logo. And at the time, because it was the first for everything, so a lot of people seem to forget that when Batman came out in 1989, it was the first time we got to see Batman in the all black outfit. Right now, they're everywhere. They've been done like dozens of times. Even the new movie that comes out has followed the same sort of formula. But when it's the first time, and you go, okay, prior to this, Batman was just in the 60s series. It was all very, very comical. Even in the comic books, he still wore the grey and all the rest of it. And then all of a sudden, in this live action movie, he's wearing the whole black. That just pushed all my buttons. And of course, my background was Star Wars. And of course, as a huge Darth Vader fan, you go, well, Darth Vader wears all black and has the cloak and all the rest of it. He's Batman. He's wearing all black and has the cloak as well. I couldn't help but get drawn into it. And it was just the right place at the right time. And it just was a marketing goldmine. And as a result, it was very, very hard to stay away from it.
Very much so. Like, and other things that I've seen too. When it came to that film, it's just like, it was like Beatlemania, if you will, or it's just you hear the stories about Beatlemania back in the day.
Yeah.
And then as I watched the documentary, I didn't realize some of the ridiculousness of some stuff that was branded with that. But when you think about it from like a marketing and merchandising point of view, they're gonna slap that thing on just anything they can to get a buck.
And it was the first time we'd sort of seen that, because prior to that, Batman merchandise was mainly for children, really, when you sit and think about it. A few T-shirts here and a few toys there, whatever. And that was it. But you are right. With the 89 movie, someone somewhere clearly said, hey, put the Batman logo on just about a block of wood and it will sell. And it did. And of course, some of the items just looked really, really groovy. I mean, it wasn't all rubbish and it wasn't all trash. There was some quality material there. There was just a lot of it. Now, of course, here in Australia, and it was we were limited to what we could get. Like the internet, of course, didn't exist at that point, so connection with other people overseas was very, very limited. So it was just running around all the shops, just seeing what you could find. And there was a lot of things that never made it to this country. But at the time, it was just hard to ignore. And for me personally, once I started down that path, that was it. The floodgates were open, and here we are today.
So when you look back on things, like, does it surprise you, like yourself, like how intensified you were about collecting those specific items that were part of that franchise at that time?
It was interesting because, as I said, I was part of a large group in the fan community. It was almost like a competition to say, well, I need to keep getting items, because when people come over to my place, they're going to say, what's new? What have you got? And it's almost like you didn't want people to come in after 4 months and everything's still exactly the same. You wanted to say, well, 4 months ago it was this big. Now, 4 months later, it's this big. And it's almost like the quality, it just wasn't important. It was more about the quantity. And at the time, that seemed to make a lot of sense to me, saying, well, okay, I'm going to focus on, because I don't have a lot of money. I can't buy expensive items. I'll just focus on a lot of cheap items. The problem is cheap items, by definition, are usually rubbish. And so I realized many years later that I actually went about it the wrong way. What I should have done is focus on the quality items, even though there wasn't that many of them, rather than just on rubbish. And because in the end, I got lumped with a lot of stuff, which I, by today's standards, would class as just complete trash. And but I didn't think of that at the time. To me, it was just get the items, boost up the collection, make it look good, and then worry about the details later on. And that's pretty much what happened.
It's funny that you say that, because I've been in that same boat, like showing off my stuff. It's just like, when people come over and they look at stuff that have no connection to that world whatsoever, you usually, it's almost, in some ways, sometimes it can be like a drug, seeing their reaction and seeing them be in shock and awe about it. But at the same time, I'm starting to get to the point now where it's like, when is enough enough?
Yeah.
And especially with like rising costs and stuff, like from my perspective, it's like, yeah, it's not that I'm hurting for money or anything. It just feels like I'm wasting money.
Yeah, I learned that after the fact, and I'll give you a perfectly good example, right? So, and there are multiple of examples, but I'll just stick with this one. When the first movie came out in 1989, there were two trading card sets, right? Series 1, Series 2. That was it, done. When you got to Batman Forever a few years later, there's like Series 1, Series 2, 3, 4, chaser cards, gold cards, blue cards, black cards, pink cards, whatever. And the reason for all that is because the people who are manufacturing all this stuff realize, oh, okay, if you manufacture it, the collectors and the consumers will buy it. Even if they don't need it, even if they don't want it, they'll do it anyway because they're already hooked. And of course, that happens today. There are things being produced that you're thinking, that is not necessary. We don't need a reissue of this character from this series, which is a reissue from 7 other series. But somebody will realize, well, if you do it anyway, there's still a market for it. Somebody out there will go and buy it. Because if they don't, they'll sit there and go, I'm missing this thing. I kind of have to get it because what's going to come after that? And that was the thing I discovered after I stopped collecting. And I found that not having to buy trading cards ever again, having to buy action figures ever again, not having to buy more bloody Batmobiles, I felt like I got out of it. And I kind of really appreciate that now because now that I look at all the merchandise that's been produced since the 1990s to today, I can look at it and go, I'm glad I stopped because I would have like been sitting on the street corner trying to find somewhere to live with surrounded by all this merchandise. So I was kind of lucky that I got out when I did because the people who do make this stuff know how to exploit collectors.
That they do. They're very good at that job. Like they've it's like a well ironed, well polished machine now.
Mm.
Um and the prices are just through the roof. Like it's like a wave of like ups and downs in terms on what things cost like now versus what similar items cost back then.
Well, the interesting thing now is, of course, the manufacturers have realized that the people with the money aren't the kids, it's the adults. And there's now a big range of products that are designed specifically for adult collectors. So we're talking about the statues, the really high end $2,000 items, things that a kid could never buy in a million years. But the quality is so good that it draws people in. And that's good. There's nothing wrong with that. That's absolutely fantastic. But that stuff didn't exist when I was collecting originally. So I was kind of lucky because the last thing I would have liked to have seen is go, oh my God, look at that absolutely fantastic Batman statue, of Michael Keaton, from either that from Batman or Batman Returns, at $2,000. And I'll be thinking, how am I going to pay for that? And of course, in Australian dollars, that would actually probably be even more. So I was kind of lucky that that stuff didn't exist, but it exists today. And so if there are people who are saying, I would like to go and collect Batman merchandise, especially the high end stuff, they've got to be prepared for the financial outlay that they're going to be looking at. It's crazy. I mean, I currently work part time in a pop culture collectible store, which a friend of mine runs, and we had an '89 Batmobile in a box, and he was selling it for over $2,000. And the box was so big it could be a coffee table if you put legs on it. And I was thinking, it was from the '89 movie. I was thinking, I'm so glad I was not collecting this thing back in my day, if it existed back then, because I've been thinking, how can I get one of those? And that would have been a really, really bad or dark path to go down. But fortunately, it wasn't an issue. So, because all that stuff came out, decades later after I finished.
Yeah, it seems like the blessing and the curse of Batman and Robin definitely suited you quite well.
Well, yeah, the timing worked out all right. And of course, I've stopped collecting now. So I haven't collected for over 20 something years. And I'm kind of glad knowing that what came out after I had finished with all the Christopher Nolan movies and what's happening now with the current film and the Justice League movies and whatever else. So I kind of dodged a bullet from that perspective. But there are people who are my age or even younger. They're still buying all the stuff. And, good on them too. It's all great and wonderful. But providing people are collecting for the right reasons and within their means as well. That's, I guess, is pretty important.
It's a very dangerous tightrope. Especially nowadays, it's like like where do you have enough self control to draw the line?
Well, yeah, because what's interesting is that a lot of collectors start when they're younger. Typically, and I was like this, and don't know, maybe even yourself. When you're young, you're single, you start work, you got a disposable income, you got money to burn, right? It's all great. You're buying stuff, it's fantastic. Then things change, and you get into relationships, and you get into buying houses and mortgages, and you got children, and all the rest of it. And all the focus changes, and all the priorities change. And I can't imagine being in a scenario saying, "I'm a hardcore collector of this." Whereas once upon a time I could afford all of this, I'm now obligated to look after a family and the mortgage and whatever else, and I can't afford as much as I used to, but the products are still coming out. What do you do? And I can imagine that would be a very difficult situation for a lot of people who get torn between the love of what they did versus what their commitments are today. So, yeah, I'm not in that position, but I'm sure some people are. And yeah, it wouldn't be good. And it doesn't have to be pop culture either. It can be just about anything, whether it be cars or model railroads or anything. The principle is the same no matter what.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I know a guy who like spends a ton on cars. Like he
Mm.
suits up his car and races and stuff, and that's to me that's crazy. Like I
The
say
key,
that with the stuff behind me, but like I'm, it's just like I just couldn't see myself pouring like thousands and thousands of dollars, like way more than like what this collection is, like
yeah,
into a vehicle. Like to me, a vehicle is just something to get me to point A, point B.
yeah. Yeah. The key, I guess, is whether if you're in that situation and you're with a family, if the partner, the other half, supports it rather than just accepts it. I mean, accepting and supporting are two different things. If they accept it, they go, "Oh, okay, the other half goes and buys all these Batman things. I don't really like it, but I just tolerate it. That's actually not a good situation to be in. But if they actively support it and they go, well, my other half buys Batman stuff and we go out together and we look for it and I actively look for it, that's actually a very, very good thing. So the issue is that if you're a long-term Batman collector, it doesn't have to be Batman, but we'll stick with Batman for
Mhm.
now, and you do meet a potential other half, how are they going to react when you say, well, this is kind of my thing, doesn't work for you? And if they just get shunned away from it, then, and which could easily happen because collecting, especially Batman merchandise, can be seen as a kid's thing in the eyes of many people. It can be sort of very limiting, and you can go, well, okay, what do I do? Do I sort of like keep the collection, sell the collection? Do I sort of just like hide it away from the significant other? It's a very awkward situation. So at the very least, you do want your partner to support what you're doing, because then they're at least going along for the ride. And if that's the case, they'll let you spend something. They'll let you keep the credit card and off you go. Spend some
Bam.
money.
Very true. Very true. One of the things in the documentary that I found interesting was the attitude of nerd culture, especially once the documentary started focusing on the cons and the conventions and whatnot.
Mm,
Because I remember as a kid going into my teens, nerd culture was different than it is now. Like you
yeah.
had to kind of be, I don't want to say secretive about it, but
Mm,
like the Star Wars kids sat at the Star Wars table. And if you went over and talked with the kids who enjoyed Star Wars, people were like, why is he going over there? Because I would do that thing because I fell in love with Star Wars. Like when the special release, actually, it was about a year before the special releases start being teased. I dove
yeah.
into books at the library and stuff. I read the Zahn trilogy and stuff. That's how I fell in love with Star Wars. But like, I remember for the longest time, it was like, if you're a nerd, like it was kind of, you were looked down upon. Now everybody's a nerd. It seems like I don't see as many of the jock preppy type people anymore.
There's a big psychological study you could have with society as to why things change. And you are completely correct. I mean, when I was in primary school in the 1970s, Star Wars had just come out. It was the rage. I then get to high school, nobody wants to talk about it or nobody wants to know anything about it. And this is the 1980s. And you are right. A lot of people kept their science fiction, pop culture interest to themselves. They didn't tell anybody. They kept it on the QT. And it was looked down upon by modern day society at the time. Now, I think the advent of the internet and particularly social media has allowed people to say, well, okay, you know what? I always was a fan. I just never told anybody. I kept it on the QT. But now I can talk about it on social media and then discover, oh, there's all these other people who love this stuff as well. Because when it was all kept quiet, if you said, I'm a Star Wars fan, who else is? They wouldn't even know that their next door neighbor could be a fan as well, or the person who
Mhm.
serves them down at the local supermarket. They wouldn't have a clue. So they think they're the only one. So once the social media thing kicked in, and people realize, oh, the person next door is a fan, and the person down the superman market is a fan as well, I can then connect with these individuals. And I think that for that reason, the whole scope has changed. And now being a fan of pop culture is considered a cool thing. And of course, what supported all that is all the movies that have came out in the last 20 years, the Batman movies, the Justice League movies, the MCU movies. It's now become the thing. And I knew of a girl, for example, she said she used to be bullied in high school because she was a sci-fi fan, but then she'd go to a pop culture expo and meet those bullies at that expo. And she'd be going, why are you guys even here? You bullied me for being a fan of this, but now it's the in thing. And that's a really good thing to see, because being a fan of something, you can now say, well, I'm a fan of Star Wars, Batman, whatever, and be proud of it. And all these other people go, yep, I am too. So I think if there's one significant change that's occurred over the past 20 years, it's the advent, or with the advent of the internet and social media. That's definitely been one of the more positive ones. And now, if you're a fan, be loud and proud. Nerds of the world unite. That's what I used to say. So, and I still do. So, yeah, it's good.
Yeah, no, it's a nice change because, like I said, a lot of people went through a lot of they faced challenges with the things that they loved and the way society viewed them. So I think it's definitely much different now, and I think it's for the better. Another thing I wanted to bring up in the documentary was um, I didn't realize you had done all this other like Star Wars stuff. Like when they start showing all the clips of all the stuff you were involved in Star Wars, I thought that was pretty cool. And the filmmaking aspect, the fact that you're working and doing your own like film stuff, I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, well, because my background goes back decades. So, I mean, I got into the fan community in 1984, and within a few years, I co-founded the longest-running Star Wars fan club in the world, which is called Star Walking Inc., and it's still running. And I was in the committee for that for 27 years. So, all throughout the 1990s, I was organising conventions and banquets and special events long before your celebrations or anything like that even came on the scene. And I was a significant part of that. I've edited newsletters and done podcasts, and I've done a whole range of things supporting Star Wars and pop culture, and I'm still doing a little bit of that today.
Oh,
So
nice.
I've got a long, long history. So I used to host social club meetings in 3 different states of Australia, where I'd be up the front behind the microphone talking about Star Wars, the new movies, the old movies, bits and pieces here and there. I've done talks in libraries. So my history is quite long and extensive. And it's not just with Star Wars. I'm also part of the Star Trek club as well, and I've made a life member of that, and I've been a part of that for almost 40 years. So I've been massively integrated into this entire society for this entire time. That's why I like as we said, I was aware of the scenario of where being a fan, you had to keep it on the QT, not tell anybody. To how today you can be, as I said, you can be loud and proud. But yeah, after I finished the Batman collecting, I did get into filmmaking. It was a way of channeling my creative interests. So I am naturally a creative person. And so it started off with Star Wars fan films in the late 1990s, early 2000s. As I said, there was a huge community of Star Wars fans here. And we got into Star Wars fan films. And of course, after that, because I had a whole team of people at my disposal, all these people who could do different things, like a director of photography here and a sound mixer there and a music composer there and makeup artist over there, they all just needed something to do. And as a consequence, in the mid 2000s, I started producing my own short films. And I did that for about 7 years. And because I had these guys at my disposal, they'd just be saying, all right, what are we doing next? And it was a very good and very creative time. And I really enjoyed it. So worked well.
Nice. Um, so speaking of filmmaking, so when you first get introduced to this project of you being the focal point, did you have any hesitations going into it? Were you skeptical, curious? Like, what went through your mind?
Yeah, it's a good question, because Michael had to come down from Sydney and we met face to face, and he was consciously aware of my history as well. And I thought, well, I'll let him do his thing. I won't interfere. Okay. I won't like suggest he put a camera here or put a light on there. I'll just let him do his thing. Now, when I eventually got to see the film 2 years ago, so it was already finished, he sent it through. And I had a look, and I had a look at it from two perspectives. One as the subject matter, and two as a filmmaker. And as a filmmaker, I could see in the movie, oh, if it was me, I would have done things certain differently. I may have edited certain parts out, shortened certain parts here, issues with audio, whatever else. So I did look at it from two perspectives. But by the same token, I thought, well, it's his project, not mine. And I agreed to be the subject matter. The only thing I was concerned about is that, and because he lived in Sydney, so we would only speak it every couple of years, I would say, are you sure you're getting what you want? Because in the end, if it's just me rabbiting on about all this Batman stuff, is that actually what you need? Is that going to work? Is anybody going to want to see this? And that was my concern, because I thought the last thing I wanted the guy to have to put up with is come down, spend all his money coming down here with his crew, do all this material, go back and go, you know what, it doesn't work. It's complete rubbish. So I thought that may have been the case, but in the end, he got it all done, and he's very happy with it. And for that reason, I support Michael completely. So at the very least, for the film, I really wanted to work for him, not necessarily for me. And all kudos to him, and hopefully it works out really, really well, because I certainly hope it does, because he put a lot of time and effort into it, a lot more than I would have done if the situation was reversed. And good on him too. So go out and see it, everybody.
Yeah, no,
For Michael's benefit.
absolutely. It was done really well. I wouldn't say I'm like a documentary connoisseur or anything, but like I watch an occasional documentary here and there, and I thought all parties. I thought it was shot well. It had a good cohesive narrative and
Mm,
story to it. Like I did like his little interactions with the figures. I'll be honest
yeah.
with you. I thought that was a nice way to separate things from a story standpoint. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't know any of that was going to happen until the final version came through. And I mean, I look at the film from my perspective is a bit of a time capsule, because the room with the Batman stuff isn't there anymore. I boxed it all up 2 years ago. So
oh
at
wow!
the end of 2019, I really got to a point, because you remember this thing had been taking so long. I thought I need to repurpose the room now. It's been sitting as a collection room for 17 years. It hadn't changed at all in that entire time. So at the start of 2020, I reboxed everything. Now I actually cataloged everything. I photographed everything. 1,300 items is what's in there, or just over.
Whoa!
Yeah, I know, it's insane, isn't it? And I boxed it all up and put it all storage. And within like a couple of weeks after that, Michael said the movie's finished. I go, oh, good on you. And of course, once it came out within the film festival circuit in the early 2000s, 2020, people were saying, oh, can we come along and photograph the room for an article? I said, well, you can't. It doesn't exist anymore. All the stuff's in boxes.
It's
And
gone.
Michael paid me a visit at the end of 2021. So running to about 2-3 months ago. And I showed him how the room looked now. And, I think he cried because the collection was gone. Then I took him to the storage shed, opened up the door, and said, well, there it all is. And there's like 30 something boxes. But yes, I did get to a point, because I discussed it in the film about what I wanted to do with the room. And as it turned out, because a lot of that footage was filmed back like in 2014,
Oh wow!
the production went for years. And so in the times that I was saying, oh, what did I want to do with the room? By the time the movie came out, it was already the decision being made. And you know what? I haven't looked back. I was glad to do it. I did it with a smile on my face. As I said, I catalogued everything, and there we are.
That's quite impressive that you were finally able to box everything up, but at the same time catalog everything. I think that's very important. You spent a lot of time, energy, money, and on that stuff. So at least there's a record of everything, if
Well,
nothing
that's
else.
right. Yeah, and that was necessary too, because I thought if ever I do choose to sell it off, I mean, I can at least got a catalog. If people say, well, "What have you got?" I can't just say, "Well, it's stuff." I have to at least show them what all that stuff is. And because when the room was originally set up, I mean, you see a lot of people with a lot of collections, and they got beautiful glass cabinets and all this lighting and spectacular, and good on them too. For myself, I just wanted to get stuff out of boxes, so I got some cheap bookshelves, set it all up, and I thought at least it's out of boxes, but it wasn't designed to be like showcase quality like presentation
Hmm.
with fancy lighting and stuff. I did think about it afterwards. I thought, well, maybe down the track I'll put in glass cabinets and all the rest of it, but because I never went into the room, it just stayed that way. And that was how it all sort of ended up.
Um, One of the things that kind of made me sad from a collecting standpoint is you had that big long bus poster that you
Mm,
never got to display.
no.
I was like,
But
I mean, it's good because it's preserved, but at the same time, it was like, man, that's gotta suck. Did you have something so cool like that piece and not being able to display something like that?
yeah, I totally agree with you. And in the end, I was just happy to have it. And sometimes with collectibles, you're thinking, okay, I can't do anything with it. I can't display it. I can't show it, but I've got it. And that's the most important thing. I mean, the movie posters are like that. You can't display them anywhere because you can't damage them. Yeah, framing them is very, very difficult. You can't laminate them. So they just sat rolled up in tubes for years and years and years. But yeah, that big poster, I was just happy to have it because Batman Returns, I was a huge fan of that. Absolutely love that film. So I was happy to buy merchandise for that. So when something like that big banner came up, it was like, oh, I've got to have that. I mean, I probably paid more than I probably should have at the time, but it was like, I've just got to have it. And then you go home and you go, I've already got it. Awesome. Put it in the room, rolled up as it was, and then move on to the next item. So yeah. And I
Yeah,
should
no.
add in too, for those who are watching this, if you do actually want to see the website that I actually put together for myself, I mean, that's like a 20-something-year-old website. My own personal website, darrenmaxwell.com.au, there's a link there to the whole site, and you can just read it and look at the pictures and see all the stories and find out what inspired the film to be made in the first place.
Oh, awesome. I'll have links up that come up during that time. So those watching now will be like, oh, okay, well.
Cool.
But I'll make sure I have all that stuff added in. So now that the film's done, and now that I believe if it's about to hit everywhere, I believe
Mm.
now finally. Uh, are you happy with the end result of it? Are you happy that it's like a time capsule from a certain point, as you spoke to earlier?
Yeah, that's a good one because there are two perspectives of how the film can be viewed, and it's worked for some people, hasn't, excuse me, worked for others. There are those who are people who are really dialed into the whole pop culture collecting thing, and they get to the first half and they get to see all the stuff that's in the room. And when you get to the whole addiction thing later on, they sort of switch off and they go, you know what, it's kind of not working for me. I just want to see a lot of cool things. But there's a story behind the story. It's not about a person who bought a lot of Batman stuff and is happy about it. It's a story about a person who bought a lot of Batman stuff who did it all for the wrong reasons. And that's the whole psychological side of it. Yeah, I think it's worked out. It's come out really, really well. There are aspects of the film that I think are fantastic. The whole intro sequence, I think, is awesome. The idea of the action figures is spectacular. It's something I would never have thought of doing. And if people do get something out of it, or they can see some of themselves in that story, whether they admit it or not, that's the cool thing. And it's not meant to be a critical piece about pop culture or about collecting or costuming or any of that sort of stuff. It is just the story about a person who went down a path for all the wrong reasons and was able to get out of it, right? And then that person had to admit to themselves why they went down that path in the first place, and be frankly honest about it. And hopefully that's what people get out of it. So yeah, it's good.
No, absolutely. It's funny that you bring everything up because, I'm watching, a good portion of the film, and I'm like, oh, that's a really cool collection. And then we start hitting on the harder topics, if you
Mm.
will. And then you start realizing, yes, there's a reason why I'm doing all this stuff. Like, what is it worth in the end? And these are conversations I've had with myself before.
Mm.
Um, but it highlights an important aspect of collecting that I think often gets overlooked. You get so enticed with I need this, I need to have this, I'm putting it on the shelf or displaying it, but what the why and the context of why doesn't matter.
I was kind of lucky because I mean I had a look during the collecting phase, especially the first few years. I loved it. I had a great time. Right, I had a huge support network. A lot of people, whether it be friends, girlfriends, whatever, they were all buying things for me. Birthdays and Christmas, I did really well out of all that. Right, I loved getting things from people that I'd never seen before. That was a huge buzz. Right, I get a birthday, time. Everybody would buy me Batman stuff because I was the Batman guy in our community. It was a big community. And I'd be given gifts and I go, I've never even seen this before. How grouse, that's an Australian term. How grouse is this? And it was good. It was absolutely, I loved it. It was only when the films sort of turned a bit sour, like Batman Forever and particularly Batman and Robin, it all went downhill. But I don't want people to think, oh, it was a negative time throughout the entire experience. And it wasn't. It was actually a good time because I was getting so much energy from all these people. And of course, the feedback was fantastic as well. So, but it only had a short run, 7-8 years, and that was it. And I was done and out of the picture. And in the end, it was kind of groovy. But the fact that Michael saw all that and decided to make a story out of it, and I'll get to sort of explain a little bit about myself in the movie is kind of funny because there are people out there who are still collecting who may not even interact with other collectors. In a lot of ways, they just sort of stay hidden in the corner somewhere, which is very unfortunate. Whereas I had a whole community of people to deal with, and for that reason, and still do actually, and for that reason, it was all a good experience, including the film itself.
Very awesome. I think that's one of the tough parts about collecting is getting out of the shell to find other people. Like I know for me, like I've been very blessed, and as you saw in the intro, I'm energetic. I like talking to people. I like finding people who have similar things. But a lot of collectors, I think, and a lot of nerds, quote unquote nerds, I think they have a problem just breaking out of that initial shell because once they break out of it, it's all good. It's just taking that first step, and I think that's something that should be done a lot more. I think it would be not only healthy but beneficial to those of us in the pop culture world.
I think something has to do with the level of competition as well. One of the hardest thing a collector can do is say, "Well, I've got all these items." They go to another collector's place and they go, "Oh, gee, that's way better than what I've got. They've got things that I could never find. Oh, I didn't even know they even had that, right?" And that can be a bit of a kick to the ego. So I think for some, possibly, some collectors do stay isolated for that very reason. I mean, the reason I never got into Star Wars collecting, it was way too big, way too competitive, and there were people who had years ahead of time, like for myself. So I had one of my best friends at the time. He was a huge Star Wars collector of movie posters and magazines and books, as I said earlier. And I thought, well, I can't compete with him. It's like, why would I even do that? I would go to collectors' fairs and I would know 4 or 5 Star Wars collectors who'd be turning up at the same time. I'd see one item that all 5 of them would want. And I'm thinking, who's going to get this? Right? It's almost going to be like, nerds at 20 paces. Whereas when I got into Batman collecting, I was the only one. It was just me. So everybody, as I said earlier, was looking out for me. And I thought, that's great. I didn't have to compete with anybody else. So I can imagine in scenarios where collectors do stay isolated because they look at their world, their collection, their bookshelves, their glass cabinets, and thinking, this is the greatest thing ever. They don't want to be in a scenario where they go somewhere else's place and go, "Oh no, my stuff is crap. My stuff is rubbish compared to them." And I think that has a lot to do with it as well. So whether they admit it or not is another thing, but that could be why a lot of collectors do stay isolated because, yeah, it could be pretty shattering to the ego if you discover that what you have just doesn't cut the mustard. So
Yeah,
in your eyes, at least, yeah,
no, I agree. I think as collectors go, I know it worked for me. I'm not saying it's going to work for everyone else. Once you realize, like, you got to find the collection that works for you.
yeah,
Like, and you can't compete with everyone because there's always going to be somebody who has more money than you, more resources, more time. Like, for me, it was just like finding the stuff that I enjoy, the stuff I like displaying and messing around with. That's why I started doing reviews on figures and stuff to begin with and taking pictures of them, is because I had to get more out of my collection than
mm,
having it sit on a shelf. Like
yeah,
I had to justify the price that I was paying for stuff and being able to do more with it than just like look at it, put it on the shelf, and walk away.
yeah. Yeah, and that's completely true. And that's the thing. If you're buying something because you like it and enjoy it, and then it just happens to come under the heading of a collection, all power to you. And that's great to see. But I didn't see that. I'm a very competitive person by nature. And I didn't want to compete with anybody else because I didn't want to be in that situation where it's like, okay, well, I've got a collection of this. Fred's got a collection of that, and his collection outshines mine. What do I have to do to beat him? Which is the completely wrong attitude to have. But that's how I would have thought it at the time, and that's the reason why I got into Batman collecting, which also included the soundtrack LPs, and like because I was the only one doing it. To me, it was the rush of being the best, right, of the group, and that's the completely wrong way of going about it. And of course, since then, I mean, I've been to Steve Sansweet's place a couple of times now, the biggest Star Wars collector in the world, and it's like, mate, I wouldn't even consider starting a Star Wars collection now
Oh
next to
yeah,
him.
no,
So
that.
yeah, and I know Brad Ladner, the guy who has the biggest Batman collection in the world, and all the rest of it. So yeah, I wouldn't collect anything now for that reason. But having said that, I do recall saying to somebody whom people would ask and say, "Can you give me any advice for collecting?" I said, "Well, just be wary that a $10,000 stamp collection can sit on one bookshelf, whereas a $10,000 toy collection may take 3 bedrooms. So beware of your means, beware of your limitations, and obviously not just from a financial perspective, but from a storage perspective, and do it because you enjoy it, and just be wary of what you're getting into, because as we said earlier, there are people out there who manufacture this stuff. They know exactly who their target market is, and it's done intentionally to suck people in and exploit the collectors producing products that they don't necessarily want to buy, but they will anyway.
No, absolutely. Um, I guess to wrap things up, if you had to tell somebody who knows nothing about the collecting world whatsoever about this film and why they should see it, could you take a stab and try to say why they should watch this film?
That's a yeah. It's I guess the first thing you would say to someone is don't see it as being a Batman documentary. That's not the focal point. It just happens to focus on a person with a Batman collection. And oh, actually, I don't know.
I know I threw it. That was a hard question.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't know because if a person is not a collector to start with, they may not get it. You need to be a collector to at least understand the logic behind some of the text and some of the narrative. Um, I don't know, but I mean, there are people who I think who have seen the film who have really dialed into it because of the story that it really, really has, and and of course you can apply it to anything. You can take the Batman thing out and just replace it with just about anything else,
Hmm.
really, whether it be a pop culture thing or even with like drugs and alcohol and gambling and whatever. You can do that with just about anything, really. So look past beyond the Batman logo thing and. But there is a story to be told there. And as I said, I got out of it in the end. And as I said to Michael at the end, we finished filming, we finished everything. And I said, do you realize, Michael, that me stopping collecting bought my house, right? I own my house, right? That would never have happened. I was still renting back in the day.
Oh, wow.
And it's because I stopped collecting that it worked in my favor. The downside is that it's caused psychological damage in my head where I will not buy anything now without reassessing as to whether I need it or whether I want it. And that's everything, right? And unfortunately, I can't switch that part of my brain off now because I will look at an item and I'll say, do I want it? Yes. Do I need it? No. Therefore, I won't get it. And that happens with everything. So I have been, if you want to use the term, mentally scarred from the experience of what I went through. So, but yeah, that's the way it goes.
Oh man, that's kind of sad to hear, but like at the same time, I understand. Like
Hmm.
it's kind of the risk versus reward of having a hobby such as
Yeah.
this. It's bound to happen eventually. I mean, some people never pull themselves out, and
Hmm.
I know people who have completely hit rock bottom and still collect, and I'm like, you gotta
Yeah.
have your priorities in order. Like, you know, to me,
Yeah.
like if something happened and I had to sell all this stuff, I would sell it in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, that's a very common issue, and I experienced that. I didn't get to the stage where I wouldn't pay the rent on time or my bills, but I would certainly have priority changes when it came to buying clothes or shoes. I need a pair of shoes for $40. Oh, there's a collectible for $80. I'll get that instead. The shoes can wait till tomorrow when they really couldn't wait till tomorrow. And you're right, that does happen. And if it's kind of funny, as you said, like if somebody was to watch the film and say, "I see myself in this person," me, and maybe that does change their habits or their what they're doing. Maybe that's a good thing because you are right. There are people who are struggling with collecting addictions, and of course, it's just being constantly fed by all the products that are being manufactured
mhm.
all the time, and there's no end in sight, unfortunately. So. And as they say in the classics, you can't take it all with you. So,
Nope.
but enjoy it while you're doing it, but don't let it control your life. And it did for me, even though at the time, as I said, it was a good experience. But then I was kind of got out of it. But yeah, don't let it dictate who you are and what you do. So, but each their own.
Absolutely. So with that being said, is there any social media or anything you'd like to plug before we wrap things up?
So if anybody wants to know more about who I am and what I've done, so there's my own personal website. It's a 20-year-old website, so it's probably not really designed to look at on phones, but either way, it's darrenmaxwell.com.au, au being Australia. You mentioned about my films earlier, so I have my own filmmaking site. So all my films are online on YouTube. My recommendation is just go to my website, dmfilms.net, and check all that out and see how you go. And there are links to everything within those two sites. So there you go.
Fantastic. I want to thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you being part of that documentary. I think it's a very important thing for not only people in pop culture to look at, but nerds and collectible aficionados alike to really understand. So I want to thank you once again for doing that. And thank you for your time. And everyone, go check out the stuff. He's got some good stuff going on. And until we meet again, everyone, great googly moogly.
Nerds of the world unite.
Thank you. We hope you've enjoyed this Comic Crusaders production. For real-time news on all things pop culture, please feel free to follow us on social media. For articles, original content, merchandise, and more, please go to www.comiccrusaders.com. Also follow along with all of the websites of the Comic Crusaders family. As always, if you like this content, please click like and subscribe to the Comic Crusaders YouTube channel.